at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from offseason to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. I want to talk about the 49ers off-season path. And of course, you watched a video I did, earlier in the week. I talked about the steps of the offseason. And the first step was the exit interviews. Kyle Shanahan had to talk to all the players. He had to talk to all the coaching staff. And then he was going to have to talk to John Lynch and then make ultimate decisions on his coaches. Well, here we are, Thursday, when I'm recording this, and the 49ers have made several decisions when it comes to their coaching staff. Out is defensive coordinator Nick Sorenson. Out is special teams coordinator Brian Schneider. Both of them are not going to be reprising the same roles. Now, for Sorenson, the 49ers are looking to potentially keep him on the coaching staff in another position. We'll be talking about that as well. But for Brian Schneider, he's just going to be out somewhere else. Kyle Shanahan kind of said in the exit interview, we expect to go against him again at some point. And the reason is, Brian Schneider was a very successful special teams coordinator when he was with Seattle back in the Legion of Boom days. So he's well thought of around the league. He'll probably land somewhere else and get another opportunity to prove what he can do as a coach. But for the 49ers now, it starts setting up the offseason and what they need to do to establish and reestablish who they are as a football team. It starts, of course, with those exit interviews and finding out where you sit as the players go on to start their offseason. And for Kyle Shanahan, he gets to work on moving forward because he can't really get into any sort of a break until he makes some of the decisions when it comes to coaching staff. And why do I say that? Well, he has to make sure he's going to get guys that not only fit, but also don't get hired away because you've taken too long. But you need to make sure that those coaches are going to be able to fit into the formula for what you want. If they have other ideas about players they need or certain type of player compared to someone else, this different skill set, that has to reverberate through their decision-making when it comes to players currently on the team, players that are going to be hitting free agency, whether they need to go get some guys or maybe move on from some players, and also even draft philosophy, because you have been drafting for a certain style of defense. If there's going to be any adjustment at all, a lot of people calling for the end of the wide nine. If you do that, you have to adjust potentially to who you have play defensive end, who you have play defensive tackle. It changes a lot of the needs for the football team. So that's exactly what the 49ers are going to do next. But we're going to talk a little bit about this presser and some of the things we got out of it and how it kind of revealed who is going to be on target to be defensive coordinator. And of course, if you looked at the thumbnail, you know Robert Salah is one of those guys. So we're going to reveal that, but we're also going to reveal exactly how the 49ers are going to approach finding defensive coordinator. And if it's a done deal, is it Robert Salah? Is it locked up? I don't think it's 100% locked up, but I do believe Robert Salah is a strong candidate for the 49ers defensive coordinator position. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet, maybe you're going to bet on Wild Card, bet with Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC. Bet Online is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, Bet Online has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. And so for the 49ers, it was first, why exactly did Nick Sorenson get fired? And I think a lot of people had a belief as to why Nick Sorenson was going to get fired. But, I had been bringing up, even last week when I talked to Mark on the Red and Bold show, this is one of the thoughts that I've had is that it might just be that, Nick Sorenson, he wasn't terrible, and maybe you wanted to give him another year because you don't really like just giving guys 1 year. But you could also have way better options available. And I think that was the first thing we wanted to find out is why exactly did the 49ers move on from Nick Sorenson? Was it just as bad as people think it was? Was it a potential that there's other candidates that Kyle Shanahan likes a little bit different? Well, here's what Kyle Shanahan had to say when they asked him about the process of deciding to move away from Nick Sorenson as defensive coordinator in 2025.
First of all, it was a real tough decision. I love Nick as a person, and I love him as a coach. Still trying to hope to keep him on board in another capacity because he's a guy I don't want to lose. But just where we're at really as a team, where I think we need to go. There's a lot of big decisions ahead for us, and as hard as it is for me to come to this conclusion, but I feel there's some options out there that can end up being a better option in the situation that we're in for our team. And when really it comes down to that, in the position I'm in, regardless of anything else, that's always the stuff I got to go with. So it was a real tough decision for me, and I'm still hoping that we can keep Nick here. But I do feel there's some other avenues that in the long run will be better for the 49ers.
There's just some better options out there. And, you can't really fault Kyle Shanahan for saying so. Nick Sorenson's a guy that the 49ers hired after a Super Bowl run, and they decided that it just wasn't working out with Steve Wilks. He just wasn't a fit. He wasn't exactly molded into what the 49ers do. Yeah, the defense had some success. They had some real struggles during the first part of the playoffs, but they definitely had righted the ship for the Super Bowl against Kansas City and played a pretty good defensive game, just weren't able to get the win. And the 49ers move on. Well, how many candidates are available at that point? And Kyle Shanahan had mentioned that Nick Sorenson was somebody he was interested in for a while. He was the guy that they were interested in when they first brought him over, but he felt he wasn't ready. That's why he went ahead and went with an external candidate like Steve Wilks. Seems like a pretty good idea to go ahead and do that if you feel someone's not ready. Now you fast forward a year and you have to move on from Steve Wilks, and you've got Sorenson there. Does Kyle Shanahan believe at that point that Sorenson's ready? Well, he said he was, but was he just more ready because of the options that were available? Everybody had already signed on. A lot of the coaching staffs were already full because the 49ers were one of the last two teams to get done with the season. I mean, they did reach out to the Chiefs about trading for Steve Spagnuolo. That just kind of shows you where the 49ers were at. So it's an interesting predicament to be in. And are there better candidates available right now? Well, I would definitely have to say so. I mean, just listen to some of the guys that are available. Guys like Robert Salah, who did interview for the 49ers job today. They completed an interview with him. That's really good news for the 49ers. They also interviewed other guys as well, like Deshae Townsend, the former Pittsburgh Steeler, who is a secondary coach with the Detroit Lions. So they are starting to make their defensive coordinator conversations and interviews, and they're trying to figure out who exactly could be that guy. So that's a couple of guys. Other talented candidates, Dennis Allen, he's been around for a while, former New Orleans Saints head coach, but he's been a really good defensive coordinator. Of course, Jeff Ulbrich, currently under contract with the New York Jets. But, if they make a hire, he might get released, and then the 49ers could be interested in bringing back Jeff Ulbrich, a former 49er, a Bay Area guy. So that would be one. And then, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals former defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, who has been around for a long time, a guy close to 60 years old. And so you could have a situation there. So better options, I think, makes a lot of sense. Maybe there's just some newness to Nick Sorenson. He just wasn't quite ready to be able to do the things that you got to do. And someone said, hey, what do you guys have to do to get this right? Has it been a wrong in the process of hiring coaches? And Kyle Shanahan had an interesting take on it, and I think it's a very valid take as to why they went with Steve Wilks and why they went with Nick Sorenson and why he's optimistic it could go a little bit better with this current search in 2025.
Back-to-back years, you fired your defensive coordinator after 1 year. Do you have to go back through the process of this? I know both different situations. Were there things that went wrong in the process to find these last two guys?
I don't believe anything went wrong in the process. I'll tell you what, it's I think more opportunistic or easier process talking about it right now and whatever the date is today. It's a little bit harder in February, which the last two were in. Being the last team to finish last year, and before that, being the second to last team to finish makes it a lot different. So there's more opportunities out there, and plan on looking into all of them.
Would experience being a defensive coordinator be important to you this time?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that, just where we're at, some of the decisions that we got to make and things like that, I think having the experience of going through this before, building things before, I think is definitely a bonus for me. It helps me with some stuff, so that's stuff I will look into. But again, you always, regardless, you don't want to put just any handcuffs on your decision. You're going to always try to figure out the best one, and so you got ideas going into that. But just being so early, I'm going to have an opportunity to talk to a number of guys too. So we'll see what that leads us to.
I think he gives us a lot of nuggets here. I think first off, the follow-up question is fantastic about the experience level. And I think that that's one of the things the 49ers are really seeking when it comes to the next defensive coordinator is somebody that can kind of adjust on the fly, that has been through things before. But Kyle Shanahan talked in this one about being a part of a build before. This is the first time that I got a real feeling that Robert Salah could actually be the guy. I didn't know if Robert Salah would be interested in coming back to San Francisco, not because of a relationship or he doesn't like the organization or anything like that, just because you don't always do it again. And what would people think if he went back to San Francisco? Would that hurt his chances of being a head coach in the future? And so I thought that maybe that wouldn't work, or maybe Kyle didn't want to go back. But with him interviewing for the position, it seems like Robert Salah is a real candidate. And I think just listening to Kyle Shanahan talk about somebody who's been through a build before, somebody that knows what it takes, somebody that knows how to adjust on the fly, he would have firsthand knowledge of what Robert Salah did to help build that defense from 2017 through 2020 before he left. He would know what Robert Salah's adjustments would be to personnel and loss of personnel. He saw that firsthand in 2020 where they were decimated by injuries, yet the defense still performed at a significant level. Was it the best? No, but they were still able to produce sacks. Kerry Hyder got 9.5 sacks that season, just to show you how well they were playing under Robert Salah. So I think that he is describing Robert Salah in a lot of categories, but I think it's also fair to say that he's looking for a defensive coordinator that can make the adjustments and do the things that need to be done, but also is going to give them keen insight onto how to continue to build this defense, because they've got big decisions to be made. They've got decisions. They're moving on from Charvarius Ward. So we got to find another cornerback. We need decisions to be made there. We are not really having things go exactly the way we want at safety with Jair Brown. Do we need to re-sign Talanoa Hufanga, or do you want to go a different way with the way that you're going to put together your secondary? Do you want more of a free safety? That's a decision. What kind of defensive lineman do we want? Are we sticking with the wide nine? I think those are all types of things that Kyle is looking for somebody to come in and give him some knowledge with. I think with someone like Nick Sorenson, he's fine just running your system. If it's a carbon copy, hey, yeah, I can run this system. I can do this and that. He can probably do that. But when you're facing injuries and when you're facing adjustments, he can't do it. And I think it was on display this year that he just struggled with adjustments as games went on. And unfortunately, that is part of the reason that he is being moved on from. So when it comes to candidates, we know about Robert Salah. We know they interviewed Townsend as well. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of others. Kyle Shanahan mentioned that they're going to interview a bunch. And so it's not a foregone conclusion that it's going to be Robert Salah. But I think the fact that he came in for an interview puts it in a light in which the 49ers definitely could go that direction. This is the most I've believed it, because he's got a couple head coaching opportunities out there. If neither one of them decide to go with Robert Salah and he's willing to interview, I think it'll be tough for the 49ers to not go with Robert Salah unless one of these other defensive coordinator candidates blow Kyle Shanahan's socks off with the approach of what they would do with his players, the adjustments that they would make, and how they would stay ahead of the NFL in the way that the NFL is trending. I think that's the only way that you're going to get somebody else. But there's a lot of good candidates, so it could be. But they asked, what about an internal candidate? Is there anyone there? Think about last year, internal candidate, they did interview Daniel Bullocks, and he was a guy that they looked at as well. Kyle just felt he wasn't ready yet, that Nick Sorenson was more ahead. So would Daniel Bullocks, or maybe it's somebody else? So let's hear what Kyle Shanahan said about an internal candidate he could turn to for the 49ers defensive coordinator search?
The internal one, I'll give Staley a shot, just talking to him. He's been here. There'll be a lot of guys outside the building, too.
It's going to be Brandon Staley that gets the internal interview. Now, just from what Kyle Shanahan was saying, the way he was looking, he said, I'll give him a shot. It didn't seem like Brandon Staley is legit in the process. I mean, maybe Brandon Staley, now that he's had a year in the system, has a better understanding for what the 49ers do. But he's also probably pretty closely attached to Nick Sorenson. He was helping him out, and yet the defense still struggled. So if Kyle felt he needed to move on from Sorensen, I don't know if that really helps Brandon Staley's hopes. Now, Staley right now is on the coaching staff, and there doesn't seem to be any movement. So there's no real decision on whether Brandon Staley is going to be at the 49ers in 2025. Seems to be that could be likely. So you bring in a defensive coordinator, you still got Brandon Staley, because I haven't heard about him getting any defensive coordinator looks around the league or any other opportunities as of right now. So it's really interesting that right now we've got the external candidates that we have. We know about the two that have already interviewed for the 49ers. That was announced officially by the 49ers. And Robert Saleh, of course, being the main name in that. I'm sure there'll be a few more. It's Kyle Shanahan's going to do his due diligence and interview a bunch. But then there's also the internal candidate, which he's probably already interviewed Brandon Staley. So you could probably offer him or put him up in that list of defensive coordinators that have already been looked at. But what about Kyle Shanahan? How open are you to adjustments? Are you wanting to stay in your wide 9, cover 3 quarters? You want to stay in this bread and butter defense that you've been running, which has been very successful throughout the years, 2019, 2023, especially, 2022 under DeMeco Ryans. Do you want to stick with that defense, or are you open to some changes? And I think that Kyle Shanahan's approach to, if he's open on changes, also is going to filter into not just what defensive coordinator he could ultimately choose, because it does widen the list of possible D coordinators. If you get outside a particular scheme, now it's broadened. There's more opportunities there. But then it also does change which personnel you could go for. Right now, we have a really good idea of what personnel the 49ers will go with in the draft and free agency by what scheme they're willing to run. We know what their jobs and responsibilities are, what the skill set has to be of any player. So if Kyle Shanahan's willing to go away from it, it could change even the players they go after, which is really, really interesting in this process. So let's listen to Kyle Shanahan and what he says about open to a scheme change or not.
Typically, you've always kind of stuck to this is who we want to be defensively. Is that still the scheme you want, or are you more open to potential changes this time?
I love the scheme that we've had here. I think it's one of the hardest things to go to when you got the right guys in the right spots. But I do think people adjust to schemes, and I think you have to adjust too, depending on your personnel. And I think that was a tougher thing for us this year. Just going into the season, it was a little bit harder than past seasons. And some of the injuries we had, I think, made it really tough for Nick. And I thought he got better trying to adjust and do different things. But I do think that's something that definitely, I'm not saying you got to change schemes, but you have to have the ability, the history, and the knowledge of how to change some stuff up when you're in some certain situations. And I think that we do need that more going forward.
Now, in answering this question, Kyle Shanahan actually gives us even more revelations about the difference between Nick Sorenson and why he thinks some of these other coaching options are better options than Nick Sorenson. He talked about being able to adjust, being able to not even having to change the scheme, but changing things up. And what is he talking about? Well, defensively, you don't exactly change the structure, your terminology, the things that you do. But depending on what team you're going against, you might have to change your thought process for that game. It doesn't mean your philosophy changes, but ultimately you change up your look. You change up the dynamic of how you play against particular teams. Some coaches aren't able to do that. Now, some of that comes from inexperience, like in Nick Sorenson's case, where he hasn't had to think about those adjustments on, you know what, in this game, the way that they're attacking us, we need to go away from the wide 9 and we need to go to this. We need to go ahead and adjust and bring in a extra defensive lineman. We need to bring in a different safety. We need to change coverage and run more quarters because they're attacking us this way. And those things sometimes are very hard for guys who haven't experienced it. Experience can often help you make quick decisions and quick adjustments because you've had to do it. Some coaches are just easy working outside the box and they're young guys and they adjust so quickly and it's no big deal. But thinking on your feet is something that's very important when it comes to coaching. Bill Walsh used to always kind of relate football to boxing. You've got to have that punch and that counter punch. Well, if somebody is getting you with their straight, you've got to be able to figure out how to move and get to them yourself with a different look. They're taking advantage of you. They came out and they came out and boxed as a southpaw, and you weren't ready for it. Now you've got to adjust, and you've got to change the way you go and the direction that you're going. So it's a big game to be able to adjust. And Kyle Shanahan's looking for somebody that can adjust on the fly. And what he found out was Nick Sorenson, because of what he believes is doesn't have his inexperience really, is the reason that it held him back from making those adjustments. He felt like he got a little bit better dealing with some of the injuries and things, but it gave us a clear vision of who Kyle Shanahan's looking for as a defensive coordinator. So any of the conversation about a guy like Navarro Bowman, as much as I love Navarro Bowman and he has 1 year of coaching experience with the Chargers, I just don't think he's a real option. So if you're seeing that, I think we can kind of eliminate Navarro Bowman as a potential defensive coordinator for the 49ers in 2025. It doesn't mean down the road he won't get more experience, but you're not going to bring in another inexperienced guy. And Kyle Shanahan was kind of vaulted into an inexperienced guy because Steve Wilks wasn't a good fit. And then when you got to February after the Super Bowl, there just weren't very many options. And that's kind of where the 49ers were at. So this is a situation where he gave us a little bit more to it when it came to that question. Are you open to a scheme change? He's like, well, I always like this scheme that we run, but the scheme has to adjust at times. So there's a little bit of flexibility when it comes to what Kyle Shanahan is looking for when it comes to a defensive coordinator. And of course, when it comes to that defensive coordinator, what else are you looking for? What else needs to stick out? Like, what is the guy that fits, makes sense? And here's what Kyle Shanahan had to say about the next defensive coordinator, what exactly it's going to take to be his defensive coordinator in San Francisco.
I'm looking for a guy who I think will fit with our team the best. I like to sit and talk to guys about our personnel. I want to obviously talk to someone about their plans schematically and what they like to do, but that's all great. What do you plan to do with our team? And that's what involves certain people. I mean, in terms of when they look at what we have, what they think we need going forward, what we got to go get. And so I want someone that kind of meshes with what I believe in. And but I also believe in that you got to fit to come up with the best thing possible that fits our situation right now. So that'll be talking about our personnel, the roster thing, a lot of things like that, and what their plan would be with it.
I love this answer from Kyle Shanahan because, yeah, someone might come in and have a idea of what they've done in the past or what the 49ers do. But what are you going to do with our personnel? One of the things that you learn, especially when you're doing coaching interviews, and I've been in several coaching interviews, was if I know about the players that are on the football team, I can describe how I'm going to best use them. I'm going to take this personnel and it fits this system. So that's what I'm going to build around. I want to build a system around the players. So Kyle Shanahan wants to talk about, what they do, what they've done in the past, what their ideals are when it comes to what they run in football philosophy. But he also wants to know, what are you going to do with our personnel? Are you going to come in and just say, hey, this is status quo. We're going to run what you do. You've got the guys to do it. We're just going to stick to it. Or are they going to come in with a unique plan and say, you know what? I love Talanoa Hufanga in this role. If we could build around this special role for Talanoa Hufanga, I think it would really help our football team. Or, you know what? I think that the wide nine isn't really what we should do anymore. I think we should do this. And I think if we made this little subtle adjustment, it would change things up. That would open up Fred Warner to be able to roam more and make more tackles. And then we could use De'Amon Lenoir on the outside because I have a really good idea for this guy. By understanding personnel and being able to talk to Kyle Shanahan, and let's be honest, every single defensive coordinator candidate that comes in to talk to Kyle should have a really good understanding of the skill set of the players of the San Francisco 49ers. They have the capabilities to watch every single game film. They have the capabilities to see what every single one of their strengths and weaknesses are on film. Now, how can I build a defense around them that's the best possible it could be? And if I don't have all the pieces I need, but it's really close, Kyle, here is the game plan. Let's go get these type of players, this kind of guy in free agency, these kind of guys in the draft. If we do, this defense is going to be back out there, and this is going to change the game. So that's the approach. You got to fit personality-wise. You got to fit with ideas of football with Kyle, right? You've got to have the same similar ideas of what a defense is. It has to fit. Steve Wilks didn't fit. He had a different philosophy. They thought it was the same, but when they got together, it just didn't quite mesh, and that's why they had to go their separate ways. So it's important for Kyle to find fit, making sure they fit in the locker room, make sure they fit personality-wise with the coaches that they're going to be coaching with and with Kyle, and they don't have any dissension. But also, you want somebody that's going to come in with a detailed plan. It's not always just as easy as I'm going to come in here, run your system, everything's going to be gravy, but it's got to be a detailed look at what they're going to get. And so I thought that was a really good answer by Kyle Shanahan. And that's exactly him allowing everyone into his mindset. And if you haven't really went through coaching interviews or you haven't understood, some of that stuff, this is a cool thing for you to be able to get a glimpse at. And if I hadn't have been in it, I probably wouldn't have understood it. But I knew exactly what Kyle was talking about because that's what I did. I could sit across from a player that I had never met before, and I could say, hey, I've watched your game film. I know what you do. I know what your skill set is. This is what I'm going to do to make you the best player you can be. And by doing that, that's going to make the team the best that they can be. And so I think a lot of times when a guy comes in, that's what the head coach wants to know. What are you going to do with the sum of my parts? And how is that going to be the best possible thing? And then how are you going to adjust as people adjust to us? And that's one of the cool things. So I love where Kyle Shanahan's going with this on the guy that he's gonna find, get that fit and the plan. Now, there was one other thing that I wanted to get to in this episode. I had some offensive stuff, of course, with Clay Kubiak and stuff. I'm going to hold that for another episode because, yes, I know we're working on getting it together and we're going to have to get the offense together, but there's not as many offensive changes. So I'm going to kind of hold that over for another episode. But I wanted to talk about the special teams role a little bit because when we went over special teams, we had a really good understanding that there was going to be a move from special teams and from Brian Schneider. Now, during this interview, it got a little bit testy for a second as Kyle Shanahan was kind of pointed at and just said, hey, we know you don't pay detailed attention to special teams. And Kyle was like, whoa, wait. And then John Lynch kind of tried to smooth it over and say, no, John, Kyle pays a lot of attention, but when it comes to like kickers and stuff, we don't know anything about kicking. That's not our spot that we're going to have detailed interest in. And I understand I'm not a big time kicking aficionado either. I trusted other people that handled that role that are much better at what you're looking for. In fact, you can't be really good at every single position. So I understand Kyle's like, I want the best kicker, so I'm going to let the guy who's been handling it all the time, the guy that's his job, make the most informed decision. You have to trust in that guy to do it. So I got it. But what Kyle did do was he went ahead and said, you know what? We have been putting a lot of attention into special teams. And this is something I've said on episodes just this week. We went out and we used high draft picks on a kicker and a punter. It doesn't mean that John and Kyle weren't trying to do what's best for special teams. They brought in a kick returner in 2022 with Brian Schneider in Ray McLeod. They brought in Oren Burks, who was a Pro Bowl special teams player. They brought in George Odom, who was an all-pro special teams player. They kept around Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, who they probably should have replaced at linebacker, but they kept him here for special teams. They've continually put a lot of effort and capital into special teams. So it made Kyle a little frustrated, and I get it. But he did have a conversation about a special teams coach, and we really haven't heard him talk about who would be the replacement for Brian Schneider. We threw out some names as we were looking through some of the guys who are potentially going to be available. A guy with the Jets, Brant Boyer. Now, he's been there through a couple of different coaching staff, so there's the possibility that the new coach could ultimately keep him there. But if he wanted to leave, a lot of times they'll let you leave, even for a lateral move because of the change, and you can make a change a lot of times. The Saints' Darren Rizzi, who was their interim head coach this season, he's a lot of intensity. Definitely a far cry from the intensity level you got from Brian Schneider. So if you're looking for somebody to kind of turn this thing around, more fiery type coach on the sideline, he could be a guy for you. A young guy like Jeremy Springer from the Patriots, I expect whoever gets hired there to keep him because he's a nice young coach, but there's always the chance. And then if the Cowboys, for whatever reason, would let John Fossil out of his contract, he's the one that I would love to get as special teams coordinator. But Kyle Shanahan was asked about somebody else, and he said this, and it was very interesting because this is not something I thought of. I did hear it mentioned, but until Kyle Shanahan said it, I didn't think it was a real possibility.
Under consideration for that special teams coordinator spot, or
Who's
is that
that?
is Nick?
Yeah, Nick
Sorenson?
would be in consideration, yes.
And just to be clear, he's been let go and you're hoping to bring him back?
I just told him he's not going to be the defense coordinator. Yeah, so I mean, he's under contract still, and I'm really hoping that he'll come back. But that's got to be something he and his family feel good about too, and the exact role that we end up carving out for him, which I'll work on here over the next few weeks.
So Nick Sorensen's in play for special teams coordinator, and I don't know how you guys feel about that. He was a special teams coordinator with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The interesting thing was Brian Schneider in 2021 was actually hired for that job, and he left and walked away a little bit early. And when he did, then he was replaced by Nick Sorensen. So that was kind of interesting. And so we've got a situation where you're going to have Nick Sorensen potentially in the special teams role, but Kyle Shanahan said he's hoping he's going to stay. There's no guarantees he's going to stay, but potentially he could stay. He's still on staff, and he could just move over to the special teams coordinator role. That could be interesting, going from defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator. We know that they would love to have him take care of the ball meetings. He was so good as the ball father, where they had a lot of turnovers created in 2022 and 2023. He did really good work with the nickel corners, and he was very flexible, even working with linebackers with Johnny Hollins. Couldn't make it to practice. So he's a good dude. They want to keep him there. But I thought it was really interesting that he was mentioned in that role. So now we've got a clear picture of what the 49ers are looking for in defensive coordinator. They're going to make their rounds. They're going to look for these guys. Robert Saleh, I would have to say, as of right now, seems to be the leader in the clubhouse, which surprises me, because I didn't think it was going to happen again. I love it, though. I love all gas, no brakes. I love the attention that Robert Saleh gets on the sidelines. He's a lot of fun. So there'd be a real intensity. So I would love that to happen. I think he's the leader right now. I think there's a long way to go. He's also got some head coaching interviews. He interviewed with Jacksonville. He's got another one coming up. It hasn't been named yet, but if those fall through, I do think that Robert Saleh is the most likely. Him and Kyle already built this thing once. Taking it to the next level could be what they do. The only thing that makes it interesting, that I don't know how a lot of people thought about, if Robert Saleh is hired as the 49ers defensive coordinator in 2025, in 2026, he could be a head coach again, and the 49ers could be hiring another defensive coordinator. But we'll worry about that another day. The 49ers are going to make some decisions. Going to be a lot of fun. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.